Next from Springfield, we talk one-on-one with Scott Musser, a utilities analyst with AARP of Illinois. We hear why AARP is against a legislative effort by electric utilities to collect more money from a recent rate increase. This runs about 25 minutes.
Scott Musser with AARP. Thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And one of the many issues that is swirling around Springfield this legislative session is the utilities, the electric utilities, both Ameren and ComEd, are looking at getting some more money out of a law that was actually passed last year. But
2 years ago.
2 years ago already. Can you give us some of the details on that?
Sure. I think a lot of people expected when ComEd and Ameren got their big bill passed in 2011, the governor vetoed that legislation. They had to come back during the veto session, override his veto. That would mean the utility companies would be out of Springfield for the next decade, since the law would give them 10 years worth of rate increases. What they're seeing now is that they're coming back asking for more rate hikes, and not only on top of that, but they're retroactive rate hikes with interest. And what it stems with is the Commerce Commission, and one of the first cases around the law, at the urging of both AARP, the Attorney General's Office, and CUB, looked at the actual wording in the law and said, wait a minute, there needs to be a bigger rate cut than what ComEd and Ameren had originally told the General Assembly would be in there. That, of course, is something that ComEd and Ameren don't want to do, to the tune of about $133 million for ComEd. I think it's about 50 to 60 for Ameren. It's something they don't obviously want to be giving back to consumers this money or lowering the rates by that much. So what they've come back and said, oh, wait a minute, that was not what we intended. That it's the Commerce Commission misinterpreting the law. I think if you can look at that, I think it's much more, it would be a case of the utility companies misdrafting the law. It's one of those technical, this word instead of that word has a huge impact, obviously, in their bottom line. So what they're trying to do now is they got two bills out there, Senate Bill 9, which Senate President Cullerton has in the Senate, and then House Bill 2529, which Leader Lang has in the House, would basically allow them to go back in time, get that rate increases that the Commerce Commission said really should be a rate cut, and then add interest for the time that they've missed that they haven't been able to collect that money.
So they got a rate increase of X number of dollars back in 11. And how much did they actually increase the rates back then?
Well, what it was is $2.6 billion rate increase over 10 years, and this was supposed to be going towards infrastructure improvements and what they called so-called smart grid.
And that had to do with, as I recall, the smart meters.
Correct. That's one of the things that's really interesting around the legislation now, is around the same sort of time the Commerce Commission was deciding this rate reduction, ComEd on their own went in and initiated an order to get a delay in their smart meter deployment, saying that because of whatever reason, and they could never give a good reason. First it was financial, then it wasn't financial, then it was basically just a prerogative type reason that they wanted to delay smart meter deployment for about 3 years, which means people wouldn't see it into 2015. But based on ComEd's own figures, when they were getting this legislation passed, that's about $138 million lost savings for their consumers from not having these meters out there sooner. And it also means that we'd be in the tune of probably about $5 million more to purchase these meters. It's one of those things when you've got a shorter span of time in that 10 years to deploy all these meters across their customer base, which is about 3.8 million customers. You've got vendors obviously knowing that they're going to need to buy all these meters and they're going to have to buy more all at once. That obviously jacks up the price. And then plus, like I've always said, the technology is constantly changing. I mean, just think from the the iPhone, from the 4 to the 4S to the 5 to whatever the next one's going to be. These meters are constantly being changed as well. So what might have cost $150 now for one of these meters might be $220 by the time ComEd goes around and buying them. So that's sort of a lost benefit to consumers. But what they've said with this legislation is they said that it will get the smart grid back on track, but they haven't said anything about changing their deployment schedule for smart meters. Instead, what we're saying is they're actually going to use this money like they've been using by not doing smart meters to just pad their bottom lines for their corporations. ComEd's corporate parent Exelon is struggling financially. They've got some big hits out there potentially with the IRS. They know that their fleets are nuclear powered. With low natural gas prices, that's really hurting their profits and not being able to compete. So when they're struggling, they're looking around for their subsidiary companies and they see ComEd being out there if ComEd can squeeze some more money out of their ratepayers, that can help Exelon. And since they're all traded as the same corporation in the stock market, any profit ComEd makes transfers directly into Exelon's.
And so, just to be clear, AARP is against passage of the bill.
We are. We think the big thing here is, like I said, it's sort of that he said, she said, where they say it's the Commerce Commission somehow misinterpreting the law. We say no, because we argued, based on the law, this decision that was reached by the Commerce Commission, that if anything, it's a drafting error. The basic process for this is, you don't like the outcome at the Commerce Commission one way or another, you have a right to appeal to the appellate court, for the appellate court to decide. And that's where this is at right now. This is, still waiting to be taken up by the appellate court. We feel that we should let the courts come and have their decision. Obviously, at the outcome of that, if ComEd doesn't like that decision, then they can pursue other legal rights at the Supreme Court or going back to the General Assembly. But to go right now to the General Assembly, well, that still, hasn't been decided by the appellate court. We think it's just a stop, and also the fact that it goes back. They're not only wanting what they think they've lost out of this, but wanting that plus the interest is going to be a big impact on consumers. And we don't think we're getting anything more out of it either, which is another big consideration.
So what would it mean, do you know, cost-wise to the average consumer on a bill?
We've heard some figures from Commonwealth Edison, and they've played it down as fairly low, to the tune of like 40 cents a month on an average $85 bill, which we're not talking about a big thing. But the real issue is, whether it's, what they originally said with the legislation in 2011, which could be, $3 to $5 a month extra, is what are we getting out of that? If we're not getting anything, and this is really going towards executive profits, lawyer fees, charitable donations, one of the things that Crane's Chicago Business has really talked about these bills on is that it really goes towards these profits on the unreimbursed pension contributions. So it means, it's not speeding up smart meters, it's not keeping electricity on any better in the Chicago area, but it's really going towards ComEd, and like I said, they're apparently Exelon's profits. And I think that's something that's really troubling to our members and others, that we're paying more money for something that we're not getting any benefit out of.
So what would you say if, I don't want to speak for the utilities, but I can imagine ComEd would say, the fact that Ameren is also the utility for Southern Illinois, also asking for the same thing, goes to show that it's not just about Exelon and our profits, that this is something we need. They might also say, it was a drafting error, we regret it, but let's not ding us for something that was an honest mistake.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, and it does apply to Ameren as well. And Ameren's got its own unique set of problems. Ameren's actually looking to get rid of their generation units in Illinois, basically their coal plants, and similar type problem. Natural gas is very cheap, and coal's very expensive now with some of these EPA regulations on there. So they're looking to get rid of that stuff to sort of shore up themselves. Though it did come out recently last week that Ameren's CEO, and this is, of course, the big parent Ameren CEO, got a 9% increase in his salary, and he's now making about $6.2 million a year. When you see something like that, it's kind of hard to really feel sad for this company and wanting to give them these retroactive rate increases when you see obviously they're doing very well despite some of these economic problems. That's something that nobody in Illinois is seeing right now. Nobody's seen their salaries going up 9%. We have a lot of members of ours in the 50 to 64 age range that are struggling. They're the ones that most likely to be out of a job the longest, and are really having trouble in this, what we're coming out of this recession, or still a recession, and just these death by 1,000 cuts that the utility companies want, and not just ComEd and Ameren, but we're seeing similar things from the natural gas side, we're seeing similar things on the water side. And I think we'll continue to see this compounding of these rate increases, and when you're not getting anything from it, it's very problematic.
If the deployment of the smart grid went out, if the meters, the smart meters were deployed, would that benefit, in AARP's opinion, the average consumer?
Well, that brings up an interesting point. I mean, a lot of those numbers were based off what ComEd sold to the General Assembly and getting the bill passed. And there's these metrics. And right now what we've heard is, Commonwealth Edison's only meeting about 75% of their metrics. And under that, the General Assembly should really be holding them accountable and start penalizing them financially. Instead, the bills that are out there right now basically give them a free pass, say, well, we're not going to hold you accountable for any of this. We're going to deem you in compliance with it. But if we did get it out, I think there's a lot of things to be seen. We've seen some responses on the other parts of the country where the savings aren't necessarily there, especially for the lower income and older customers. A report was just out by Medill about the smart meters in Chicago, sort of showing where ComEd will eventually get around to deploying them. One of the areas that's not going to get it is parts of the south side of Chicago, where it tends to be much lower income and older, because they don't have access to the computers to really take advantage of the smart meters. So it's kind of one of those things that
consumers, you mean?
The consumers, yeah, exactly. And that, somebody that might be elderly or low income that doesn't have a computer, doesn't have internet service, can't get online to track real-time pricing. That's when the price of electricity could change, throughout the course of a day, and even to sign up for some of those programs. So there's some of this where there's going to be consumers that are paying now for it, and everybody is in the ComEd and Ameren territory paying for these new meters, even though they're not out there. And then some of these folks are going to continue to pay for them even once they get out there, but may not be able to reap any of the benefits that come with it.
But what would be the answer for that? I mean, is it not to put out the meters, or to make sure that you put the meters in the south side?
Well, I think it's one of those things. I think a lot of it goes to education. That's one of the things that we've said along.
I'm not sure what AARP, in other words, are you arguing for one of those two positions, either don't do it or to make sure you also do it on the south side? Or?
Well, I think you got to do it everywhere. I think otherwise, potentially, if you don't make it, so you're getting in some of these places, I think you're kind of looking at digital redlining. I think you're choosing these areas that may be more well-to-do or have better access, and sort of waiting to do these other ones. I think it should be spread around the area equally. One of the things we've said, and we've been working on the smart grid issue for a while, and actually a collaborative process with the utility companies, the Commerce Commission, and other interested parties. One of the things we always talked about was there really needs to be consumer education. Otherwise, putting a digital meter in somebody's house doesn't necessarily imply benefits on their end. I mean, the biggest benefit for a smart meter is on the utilities end. It means that they can remotely connect or disconnect from a substation without having to roll out a truck. It does make it easier in some outage things where they can now detect by pinging the meters whether somebody's have service or not. But those aren't things that necessarily correlate to consumer savings. And that's where I think, with the consumer paying for it, if they're not getting the full benefit because they don't have access to it.
Well, and one can imagine any business, in this case utilities, if they're not having to pay someone to physically go out and be a meter reader, not being a vehicle, the gas, just the labor dollars, all of a sudden you're going to eliminate that. It would be a massive savings, I would guess, on behalf of the utilities, which is not a bad thing, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But relative to the benefit structure, as I understand it, for consumers, the benefits would be that you can see perhaps on an ongoing real-time basis what you're spending on electricity, and you might go, well, I didn't realize having the lights on in the garage was costing me an extra $5 or a month or whatever.
So, yeah. And there's other things around it, and then there's the talk of the in the home type products and services around the meter. I mean, if you had a digital thermometer or thermostat, they talk about now smart appliances, which are just starting to roll out. But those are all things that the utility company isn't providing. That's cost to the consumers. That some consumers may never be able to afford those products and services to take better advantage of what these digital meters might give. And I think one of the things about rolling the trucks in with people going out is obviously a huge thanks to the utility company. Good or bad, and some people's takes in having the meter readers available. Right now we see get a lot of complaints around the estimated billing, where the utility companies don't go out and read physically the meters all the time. They come up with estimates, which could be good to someone. They could benefit a little bit lower rate, but when they go to true up, they might end up paying a higher. But the thing is, there's no promise that those savings get passed down to consumers at all.
So where are those bills at this point?
Well, it sounds like the Senate version 9 is at least at hold right now. Did pass the Senate Executive Committee about a month or so ago. but hasn't moved since then. The House version of the bill will be up on the 12th of March in the House Public Utilities Committee, so we'll see where that one moves. And I think, you know, one of the things we were happy to see originally with 9, it looked like it was going to be really fast-tracked. I think there's a lot of very other pressing issues out there that, you know, AARP and, you know, other organizations say the state needs to focus more on than going back out there and helping these utilities get these retroactive rate hikes.
And the utilities are making what argument that, aside from the fact that we made an error, are they saying that there's going to be some dire consequences if they don't get this money?
Well, one of the big things is they've never admitted that the error has been their fault. What they've always cast it as is the ICC, and I think they're trying to basically pit the General Assembly against the ICC.
As far as the interpretation
of it, saying that, you know, the ICC somehow is, you know, off the range, doing their own thing, and the ICC needs to rein them back in. So I think that's been one of those things that's been an interesting argument to people in the General Assembly, that to see as, you know, they pass the laws, but as a, you know, subset of the executive branch, the Commerce Commission's there for a purpose. I mean, they're there to regulate these, you know, monopoly companies that don't have any other direct competition that are supposed to be regulated. That's the role of the ICC. So it's sort of that pushback, or the trying to get a pushback in the General Assembly on there, and not really talk about the midst of it, whether, you know, what does these retroactive rate hikes have to do, what is the impact on consumers, and is there any consumer benefit from these rate increases? I think that's been the big thing, and like I said, there hasn't been any sort of acknowledgement from the utility companies that it may have been a drafting error. They've always sort of spun it as it's an interpretation error, and if it is an interpretation error, then I think that's, you know, even better reason to leave up to the appellate courts. Like both chambers last year passed resolutions that they felt clarified what their intent of the legislation was when they passed it. You know, the appellate court can certainly take that into consideration, but the appellate court will have to listen to both sides. They'll have to listen to the sides that argued for what was Commerce Commission's decision, and they'll have to listen to the utility side, which is arguing obviously in you know, opposition or counter to what the ICC decided.
Do you know if the bills were to pass, what is the effective date? Is it an immediate effective date? Or?
I believe it is an immediate effective date. There's some provisions in there depending when they come into law. So I think what, you know, time-wise, I think everybody sort of expects that, you know, obviously past one chamber, have to go through the other chamber. But I think part of the goal is to really get these bills on the governor's desk before the end of session, and the sooner the better. So, you know, we've, you know, have heard, you know, obviously the opposition from the governor's office on this legislation, and probably, you know,
is the governor, I'm sorry to be clear, is he opposed, you said?
He is opposed, yeah, and I would expect that given his opposition, he'd probably veto the legislation. One of the things was looking at that timeline, is there enough time then, you know, even if he used his full constitutional 60 days before taking action on it, would it be back in the General Assembly to veto override it before they even left town for the end of session at the end of May? That's one of the things I think looking at, and that will, I think, is what the General Assembly sort of is expecting to happen. The governor would veto it, and they'd rather get it back for them to try and override the veto before they adjourned for the spring.
Do we know where the Attorney General is?
Attorney General's office is opposed, along with the Citizens Utility Board and also the Illinois Industrial Energy Consumers. These are sort of the big energy consumers who were opposed to the legislation 2 years ago as well, because, you know, these are some of the big companies, the big producers across the state, and it's going to cost them a lot of money because they pay a lot more in electricity costs. One of the things that they said too was, if there's any sort of benefit on their end from some of these efficiencies and smart meters and smart grid, they've done a lot of that on their own, but now they're looking at picking up these additional costs. And like I said, so much of it actually is really because of these so-called formula rates, actually goes towards executive contributions, executive bonuses, charitable contributions, lawyer fees, pension contributions, all these other things that have nothing to do with reliability or real smart grid.
Mm-hmm. And on the interest, we'll wrap up here quickly, but what you say, they would go back and want to collect the dollars the utilities companies say would be due them plus interest. What interest rate are they charging? I'm
not sure the exact interest rate. I think it's somewhat tied. I know the original was tied to the Treasury bonds, so I haven't seen the exact. It's probably going to be a low rate. It probably lower at this point, but it's still one of those things that I think it's hard pressed to find any sort of retroactive thing like that, and actually, you know, kind of in a, you know, after the fact type, you know, deal where consumers, you know, they've paid their utility bills and now they're going to have a true up here to say, oh, wait a minute, we're actually going to charge you back for this other stuff because the Commerce Commission didn't rule the way we wanted them to, but we were able to get the General Assembly maybe to convince them to override that decision by the Commerce Commission.
Scott, before we leave, you focus on utilities. What are some of the other utility issues that you're dealing with this spring?
Sure, and sort of direct follow-up to that, now what we've got is the natural gas companies. They're coming in now wanting special regulatory treatment too, in their own version of these formula rates. They're really selling it as a
like
jobs.
NICOR?
Actually not NICOR, but it would be Peoples and Ameren. NICOR is sort of an unusual predicament. When they had a merger a few years ago, they, as part of the agreement to get approved, so they wouldn't increase rates for about 3 years. So right now it wouldn't apply to NICOR. If the law passed, or the legislation passed, became law, they could obviously opt in the future. But right now it's Peoples Natural Gas and North Shore, which is their a little bit smaller sister company, and then Ameren Natural Gas, which serves the downstate area. So they want to come in and get very similar. At this point, it's almost, in our interpretation, even worse than what ComEd and Ameren asked for on the electrical side to begin with back in 2011. One of the big differences is there's no smart grid component on natural gas. There's no digital meters that they're talking about doing with this. There's no transmitters on the power lines or anything like that. I mean, it's basically infrastructure. You can talk about replacing pipes. And this one's, it's similar but a little bit different. The genesis of it is basically the Commerce Commission had approved some of these infrastructure improvements for Peoples. Then it actually went to the court, and the court decided that the Commerce Commission had overstepped its boundaries, which does happen. Obviously, the court can go either way in some of these cases. That's why the court is an important check and balance on this process. So the court said no, and it's gone back to the Commerce Commission now. Ameren and Peoples feels that they're not going to get the same sort of treatment based on some of the changes that's been at the Commerce Commission, which the makeup of the commissioners themselves. So, and then seeing what ComEd and Ameren were able to get on the electric side are now before the General Assembly asking for similar formula rate treatment.
Similar, is it going back in time and a capture, and what kind of a cost again would it mean to consume?
So this wouldn't be retroactive. This would be similar to what ComEd and Ameren got in 2011, basically just outlining formula rates, allowing them to basically lock in guaranteed profits, and for the next decade.
Is that a bad thing on utilities? I mean, let me just take the alternative view. They're kind of a different, it's not like an optional business. I mean, we all want to have electricity. We all want to have at least access, generally speaking, to natural gas. So them being monopolies, I don't, do they have a legitimate argument to say, look, we have aging pipes underground, we don't want those things decaying, we're going to have that cost? Or is your argument that, look, you should be building the maintenance costs into your ongoing operational budget and charging accordingly?
It's basically that. I mean, nobody faults these utility companies, and we think it's actually good that they're improving their systems. There is aging pipes, and especially in parts of Chicago, these pipes are very old. And I think they're on track to do that. In most of these cases, nobody opposes that. It's all about, it's not opposing the replacement and the upgrading of these pipes, it's what the collection process is, how much they're able to get. Right now, pretty much anything they invest in infrastructure, they can collect on that. It's just, can they collect on top of that? Can they make additional revenue on that? Are they over collecting? That's where it really comes down to, and that's the problem with formula rates, is it allows them to tie in so many other things, executive bonuses, charitable contributions, lawyer fees, all these other things that have nothing to do with the replacements of these pipes, but roll it into one big formula, expedite the process through the Commerce Commission so there's less time to review the big picture of it all, to see, this cost went up, but this cost went down, so what should your new rates be? And I think, being regulated monopolies, there was a regulatory compact, and they are treated differently. They know that they're going to get so much back, but they also know that they got to keep their commitments to their customers. And I think these are just sort of a sidestepping of that regulatory compact to sort of get outside of their regulators and go to where they think the venue is a little bit better, and that unfortunately seems to be the General Assembly.
All right, well, Scott Musser, we appreciate you taking the time to talk about it. We'll follow up on those bills as they go through the legislature, and maybe we can visit again with you as the laws progress through the legislative process.
Great. Thanks, Terry.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.